Okay, thank you. I'd like to just welcome you to today's events. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jonathan Wilson, Project Director at Cordium UK. 2014, what lies ahead? A compelling year for regulation. Compelling, a useful word, in the sense of gripping, the drama and tension of national regulators creating enforcement actions as they supervise financial services. Compelling in the sense of absorbing the will they, won't they saga of remuneration rules and whether payout process provisions will be applied to asset managers. Compelling in the sense of unrelenting, the volume and complexity of regulatory change that is now being implemented in a recovering economic environment. And compelling in the sense of compulsive, knowing that the regulatory agenda just can't be put down and the ending still remains uncertain. Now, we'll turn our attention to UK and Europe this afternoon, in particular AIFMD and the wider UK agenda. We'll also have a presentation around technology solutions for compliance services, and we'll also take some time to focus on corporate and personal tax issues. We've even found space in the agenda for a session on behavioural analysis and coaching presentation around the importance of skill in asset management. Now, if there's one national regulator that asset managers do analyse the behaviour of the most, it is surely the SEC. Its rulemaking reaching out across the international financial services. The SEC has recently announced its examination priorities for 2014, setting out market-wide priorities and priorities specific to investment advisors and other firms. One of the aims of the SEC in publicising these priorities is to better inform the public about what the SEC is doing. To better inform us, I'd like to welcome Bill Mulligan, who will present to us and lead our first panel session on what to expect when expecting the SEC.
Thank you very much. I know Stephen and John have also thanked everybody, but I just want to thank everybody attending. As John mentioned, my name is Bill Mulligan. I'm the CEO of Cordium US. I'm going to be leading the first panel of the day today. You can see the title is What to Expect When Expecting the SEC. Before I do so, you've already gotten instructions on the iPad, so feel free to ask questions. We're going to be doing some polling questions in this first session. But with that, I'm going to start. I'm going to introduce our panel first, who will be adding a lot of valuable insight. I'll start with Jillian Timmermans, who's a vice president and partner at Cordium US. Jillian and I have worked together for quite a period of time. I'm then going to move on to the rest of the panel. I'm going to ask each one of them just give us a little bit of perspective about the firm they work in, maybe sort of couch where they're coming from as it relates to today's panel. We will start with Abrielle Rosenthal, who's a senior principal and senior compliance counsel at Towerbrook Capital Partners.
Hi, as Bill mentioned, I'm senior compliance counsel at Towerbrook Capital Partners, part of the in-house legal team with a particular focus on compliance and regulation, both in the US and the UK. We are a SEC registered investment manager, or investment advisor in the US. We have not yet been visited by the SEC. We registered effective March 2012. We are expecting a visit in the next couple of years for reasons that you'll hear about today. We also have a UK FCA registered entity, and we run a combined compliance program for both entities.
Great. Next on the panel is Michael Perry, and he's the Chief Operating Officer, Chief Compliance Officer, and a partner at Comac Capital.
Sure. So Comac Capital is a global macro fund based in the UK. We have an investment manager also located in Malta. We're SEC registered. We're also CPO with the CFTC and FA, and we're also FCA authorized and regulated and working through the AFM process at the moment.
And finally, we have John Hurd, who's an executive partner and general counsel at Abingworth.
Yeah, Abingworth is a life science focused venture capital fund based in the UK, and the management entity is FCA authorized and registered. We're also going through the AFM registration at the moment, but we have about half of our investments in the US, and we have a US affiliate who was caught by Dodd-Frank and had to register as an investment advisor in 2012.
Well, great. Thank you. Well, you'll see we've got the agenda up, and I'll sort of walk through what the agenda plan is today. I'm going to spend a little time just talking about sort of some stats and figures as it relates to the SEC, and in particular SEC examinations. I'll spend a little time giving a little bit of detail about presence exams, which we'll talk about has been the focus of the SEC over the past year or so. And then I'll also give some feedback on what we're seeing from an SEC enforcement and what are common deficiencies being found. At that point, I'm going to hand off to my colleague Jillian, and she's going to go through more practical issues as it relates what to expect from an SEC exam. What does it feel like? What does it smell like, for lack of a better term, although people will probably say it doesn't smell too great. But we'll give you a feel of what it is like. Then I'm going to come back and just sort of introduce what I think Abriel mentioned were the SEC priorities for 2014. We'll sort of, what are those stated priorities from the SEC? And then we'll have a panel discussion along the lines of what do they think about it, what are their firms doing, what are they concerned about, what do they think the SEC should be focusing on. But with that, we will get into our first slide. And as I said, I'm going to go through some stats and numbers. You'll see we're focusing primarily based on Cordium's client base on private fund advisors. But as of February 2014, there were over 4,000 private fund advisors registered with the SEC. That's about 40% of the entire registered investment advisor industry. There's about 10 to 11,000 advisors registered with the SEC. Of those 4,000 advisors, about 2,000 of them has registered quite recently, over the past 3 to 4 years. And you'll see that the trigger date was when President Obama actually signed Dodd-Frank into law. Although the deadline for registering was March of 2012, a lot of them registered right out of the gates. It is important to note that almost 8%, 352 of them, are actually domiciled outside of the U.S. And of those domiciled outside of the U.S., the vast majority are domiciled right here in the United Kingdom. That will lead us to our first polling question. How many members of the audience work at a firm that is registered with the SEC as an investment advisor? Don't answer yes if you're just an exempt reporting advisor, but we'll throw that out to the audience and see what the feedback is. Wow, okay. So we've got nobody registered. Lucky audience. Oh, it's changing. Okay, we'll call it here. Say 34, looks like 33, 34% of the firms represented here today are actually registered with the SEC, so very, very interesting. So with that, we'll get into more detail around the specifics of what the examination regime in the United States looks like. The examination regime is run by a group under OC, which we refer to as the Office of Compliance, Inspections, and Examinations. And they have a particular program called the National Exam Program. It's important to note at the outset that the National Exam Program actually has 4 areas. We're really only going to be focusing in pretty much on half of one of the areas today. One area is the investment advisors and investment companies. And investment companies, from a U.S. perspective, are your traditional registered mutual fund products. Second are broker-dealers. Third are self-regulatory organizations, such as FINRA in the United States. And fourth is clearing and transfer agents. But as I mentioned, we're going to talk today primarily about the examination regime as it relates to investment advisors. A couple of other pieces of information. The National Exam Program is run by an individual named Andrew Bowden, who's been with the SEC for quite a period of time. And there are actually 12 NEP offices throughout the United States. So I guess we've just sort of got the who runs it, what it is, what is its mission, and you'll see we've got some of the mission points up on the screen right now. One is to improve industry compliance. 2, clearly identify and prevent fraud. 3 was one of the ones that's really evolving and quite interesting is to monitor risk. And you'll see we've given you some offices there that have come up, the Office of Risk Analysis and Surveillance, Office of Large Firm Monitoring. Clearly with the trend that we've seen, I think we've seen it actually throughout the world, is that coming out of 2008, 2009, regulators came with a view they simply did not have the data they needed to evaluate risk. And that meant risky products to the system, that meant risky firms to the system, and risky players to the system. And what did we see coming out of that? I think from a US perspective, we saw the development, the expansion of a Form ADV, where they went out and said, we need to know a lot more, in particular, about private funds. So there used to be like 3 questions that you'd answer about each private fund. That expanded to sometimes close to 6 pages of questions. You've also seen the Form PF. Why? Because they're gathering more data. They're sharing the data among regulators to monitor risk. Finally, the fourth mission statement of the National Examination Program is to inform policy. And to a great degree, this is the educational piece. This is where the SEC, and you're seeing it in the President's Exam Initiative we will be talking about through outreach seminars, and they have what are called CCO outreach seminars, for Chief Compliance Officer outreach seminars, where they will go out and proactively speak to the CCO community, telling them what they're seeing in exams, and actually informing them what other firms are doing wrong so that they can learn from that. Next, I thought we'd just give you an introduction in speaking about the SEC. What are the different types of exams that are out there and that are possible? And as you see, we've really gone through 4 types of exams, although from year to year they do change. We have what we refer to, or we historically would refer to, as routine exams. Frankly, as a function of the President's Exam Initiative that's been very active over the last 2 years, we don't see routine exams as often anymore because they're using so many resources on the President's Exam Initiative. But they're still possible. We see them from time to time, and I think that there will be a reversion to that over time. Second type of exam, which I've already inferred is the most popular, for lack of a better term, type of exam, are presence exams. And these are really focused at newly registered Dodd-Frank advisors. So they're going at that group of, and primarily private fund advisors that registered going into that March 2012 deadline, and they had a stated initiative, which I'll talk about later, to go out and get a certain percentage of those. Those types of exams tend to be much more focused. They're really not going to request as many information. They're not going to theoretically ask as many questions. And time, they should be quite a bit shorter. You'll see on the screen today, we say they usually average 90 days. Our experience, to be honest, has been much less. Sometimes you're looking 2 to 4 days of on-site time. They may keep it open for a period of time, but much less time. The third type of exams you'll see from time to time are industry sweeps, and these are focuses on particular issues. You'll see we've given you recent examples, the use of social media or disaster recovery preparedness. In the late 90s, it was a very well-known sweep around soft dollars and how firms were using soft dollars. The one thing we are seeing there is that regional offices inside the United States will develop expertise on certain issues. So if, let's just say for argument's sake, the San Francisco office is focusing because they've got a lot of private equity in investors or advisors in the Bay Area. They focus on social media. They will go out and do the sweep in other regions because they will use the expertise they build and sort of concentrate that expertise and take advantage of it. Whereas historically, that would not be the case, but the SEC is changing a bit on the way they go about it. The fourth type of exam is frankly the type of exam you do not want to have, is a for-cause exam, which is usually based on some sort of a tip or a complaint, either from a former client, an investor, or former employee. And those are typically unannounced, where they sort of come through the door, and it tends to be a very uncomfortable exam to have. So with that, as I mentioned, we'll go through some numbers and stats of what we're seeing. For fiscal year 2012, the SEC was only able to examine about 8% of registered investment advisors, so a relatively small percentage. As of April of last year, over 40% of advisors, including those that registered under the Dodd-Frank, had actually never been examined. And as of April 2013, an estimated 20% of all advisors that have been registered for more than 3 years have never been examined. And why do I make that point in particular? Because very, very recently, within the last week, the SEC announced a new initiative. And it's so new it didn't make it to the slide, but I will tell you about it. It's called the Never Before Examined Initiative. They are going out with the stated goal of examining 25 to 40% of the pool of advisors that have been registered for 3 or more years and never been examined. They've gone out, they're notifying those investors, those firms, basically telling them about the initiative. The fact that you get that letter does not necessarily mean you will be examined. You're putting you on notice of the initiative, and then they will then go out and implement an examination program. The focus of this, stated focus of this examination initiative has got really 5 points to it, and some of them you'll see are quite similar to what I'll talk about in presence exam initiatives, and quite similar to what we'll talk about later with the panel as it relates to 2014 priorities. The focus will be around compliance programs, filings such as ADV filings, Form PF filings, what other regulatory filings, marketing, portfolio management, and safety of client assets. So that is a brand new initiative. We expect to see a lot of coming out of that, because the presence exam initiative, which I will talk about in the coming slides, is really going to be finishing up at the end of March of 2014, and we should see them switching over to this never before examined initiative. And clearly, as we mentioned, the focus on 2013 was conducting presence exams. And that leads us to polling question number 2. Get out those iPads. If your firm is registered as an investment advisor, and 33% of you, 34% of you were, has your firm ever been subject to an examination by the SEC, yes or no? So it looks like we might have a lot of people that are subject to the never before examined initiative. I won't tell them. So with that, very interesting. So we're going to move on to discussing presence exams and just give you a little flavor around what the presence exam initiative is. As I mentioned, the presence exam initiative was an initiative to go out and examine very quickly as many newly registered advisors as possible. I think the theory to some degree was hit them in a very focused way, hit them very quick, and make sure people get on the right track sooner rather than later. As of January 2014, over 250 of these presence exams have been completed. That puts them on pace generally to meet the goal of 15 to 25% of new registrants by March of this year. We are seeing participation from every regional office around the United States. We are also seeing them do presence exams outside of the United States. Many of you know, I think it was September, October timeframe, the SEC actually engaged in a number of presence exams right here in London. We're definitely seeing issues being noted in the stated 5 target areas, which I will talk about on the next slide. And we are already seeing it contributed to developments, which one of the stated purposes of the presence exam initiative was to go back out and educate. The Division of Investment Management at the SEC released a guidance as it relates to the custody rule. And as everybody knows, post-Madoff, the whole concept of custody and safety of client assets is a very important topic for the SEC. And frankly, they had found a lot of firms that had been in violation of many of the technical aspects of the custody rule. They've also released guidance and caution on broker-dealer registration requirements, and people may be familiar. There was a gentleman by the last name of Blass at the SEC who came out and called into question whether certain private equity fund managers, and also raised the issue of hedge fund managers should be required to be registered as broker-dealers in addition to being registered as investment advisor. Thankfully, there has been no movement on that just yet. We're still waiting to hear more formal guidance. So what does the presence exam initiative focus on? There's really 5 high-risk areas that it focuses on. And what you'll see, there is some overlap with what I mentioned before in the Never Before Examined initiative. The first area is conflicts of interest. And you're going to see that as a running theme. And here they're going to want to see, what are you doing to demonstrate that you're identifying conflicts of interest? How can you demonstrate that you ask questions of employees, vendors, third-party providers, business counterparties? And then not only what are you doing to identify them, what are you doing to address them? And we'll talk about this as we go through. There's a running theme in the US that it is a disclosure-based regime. So when you have issues or conflicts, what they're going to want to see, have you disclosed that out to your clients? Have you disclosed that out to your investors? Second area, which is always hot, is marketing and performance advertising. What kind of policies and procedures do you follow with respect to the preparation of those materials? What type of controls do you put in place? Who has to approve them? Are you using any what would be considered aggressive performance-related materials? Do you use any sort of hypothetical performance or back-tested performance, presumably with new products? Third area is portfolio management. Again, they're going to really focus there. Is any sort of style drift? The fourth area is custody, which, as I mentioned, is always quite hot. More of the issues that you're seeing, thankfully, is when they are noting issues, they're not substantive issues where people are not safeguarding client assets. What you're seeing are more technical violations of the custody rule. Those of you who are registered with the SEC and are familiar with the rule, there are quite a few technical issues as it relates to the custody rule, and it does lend itself to being violated, sometimes in minor ways, quite often. And the last area is valuation. What kind of policies and procedures do you have around valuation? What kind of documentation is in place? Do you have a valuation committee? Are you following it in all instances? So those have been sort of the focus areas as it relates to the President's exam. So with that, I'm going to lead into polling question number 3. And the question for today is, which one of the 5 targeted risk areas expected to be focused on by the SEC in a President's exam? And there is quite a bit of overlap as it relates to the Never Before Examined initiative, give you the greatest concern? And we're going to ask everybody to answer the question, regardless if you're registered or not, just to get a bigger pool of answers. So is it conflicts of interest, marketing, performance advertising, portfolio management, custody, valuation, or if you view that everything's nailed down and nothing really gives you concern, you can say none. So it looks like conflicts of interest is our winner, which I actually would have thought marketing performance advertising would have been the winner. But as my wife often points out, I'm not right that often. So with that, we're going to go into just a couple of more numbers and stats around enforcement and deficiencies. What are we seeing? Clearly, the SEC is active as ever. And just in 2013 alone, they brought 686 enforcement actions, which is a very, very busy year. In particular, as I think people know, although these are brought by federal prosecutors, there's been a tremendous amount of activity around insider trading, and in particular, one firm that is located in the state of Connecticut under the name SAC Capital. And as people know, very recently, on February 6th, a former portfolio manager of that firm was found guilty of insider trading. It was the 8th insider trading conviction of a current or former employee at SEC Capital. They are clearly focused in that area. There's one particular U.S. federal prosecutor that is bringing most of the cases, and he is very, very successful at it, and they will continue to do it. It will be an initiative they follow for quite some period of time. We are seeing some new enforcement strategies, and in particular, the first one that I'll note is a bit troubling, although it's been something we've actively worked with clients, is the broken windows. And that's where they will go after smaller, more minor violations and assume it's indicative of much larger problems at the firm. That's why we speak quite regularly with clients and say, listen, these seem like low-hanging fruit, but if there are a lot of small, little problems, they will come to the conclusion that there are bigger problems, and you will be in the middle of a much larger examination trying to counter that assumption. The other one is aberrational performance risk analytics, and this is really post-Madoff, right? Are there firms out there that just have too good, too consistent a performance? Is it saying something that there might be something wrong there? So you're seeing that as an enforcement strategy. The final thing I'm going to talk about before I hand over and we sort of go into the practical issues around audits is really common deficiency themes. What are we seeing? And we're seeing really sort of 4 main themes that we're seeing, and in particular, I'll go through 2 cases where we've seen where the CCO has actually had some liability. Number 1 is deficient or non-existent compliance programs. Frankly, firms that went out, knew they had to register, filed the registration, and did nothing else. Or they would basically buy a manual for $300, $400 off the shelf and not tailor it in any way, shape, or form to their business. Second big area is where they're finding very specific, no annual review, and as people who are registered with the SEC should know, registered investment advisors are required every 12 months to go through a comprehensive annual review. They don't have to work with a third party to do it. They can do it themselves, but they need to look at the scope of their business. They need to look at problems that have arisen during the prior year. They need to look at changes in their business. Did they put out new products? Do they have new regulated entities? They'll need to look at changes in the regulatory landscape and say, hey, we're on top of compliance issues, and our compliance program is dynamic. It evolves. It changes. Another area, which I know is a source of pain for many clients, is around code of ethics, where they did not adopt a code of ethics. They were not tracking the personal trading of their employees. That has been a common deficiency seen. The last two are recidivism, really where you see a firm that has actually been noted for particular issues and they do nothing about it. Here we actually have a case. It's called Consultiva. They were originally examined in 2005. They noted a number of issues. They had a compliance manual that was not tailored. They were of the view that their chief compliance officer was not familiar with the U.S. Advisors Act, and they had ADV inaccuracies. Unfortunately for Consultiva, the SEC came back in 2010, and they had not addressed any of those issues, and they had quite a few more issues. And they hit them pretty hard. They were forced to hire an independent compliance consultant, and the CCO was forced to pay a relatively significant fine. The fourth area is really egregious behavior, where they're really of the view that the firm itself or the CCO in particular is proactively doing things that they should not be doing, where they alter documents or backdated signatures. And we've got a case that we've mentioned here called the Omni case. And this is a case, it's probably a bad one because it was a really funky case. It was one of the sole owner who was also the CCO, who was traveling out of the country quite often, clearly didn't engage in any supervision, and was requested by the SEC to produce certain documents to show that compliance had signed off on the documents, and they backdated them. They signed them literally the day that they were producing the documents, where in fact they should have been signing those documents years earlier. And in that particular case, there was a complete industry ban for the CCO and a $50,000 fine. So that's it for the introduction. I just wanted to give you a flavor of where we're seeing things in the U.S. regulatory landscape. Right now, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Jillian Timmermans, who's going to walk you through some issues around an SEC exam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. So right now, we're going to talk a bit about what most advisors' biggest fear in being registered with the SEC, really actually being examined by SEC staff. As a compliance consultant, my involvement with an SEC examination typically begins with an email from a client. There's a red exclamation point attached to the email and the words "call me" in the subject line. It's pretty much my indication that a client is about to go through an SEC examination. As a registered investment advisor, for those of you that are registered as a full-blown investment advisor, your examination journey is typically going to begin with a call from one of the examiners that's been assigned to your account. From there, typically the initial document request is only a few days away. So usually that initial introductory call kind of gives you the chance to speak with the examiner that's going to be working on your account, go through some initial preliminary items, and then usually within a day or two you'll be emailed a copy of that initial document request. That initial document request is really going to be your guidelines for what you need to start working on in terms of preparing for the SEC exam. Today we're going to go through some key components of an SEC examination and try to provide some helpful tips in terms of both surviving an SEC exam as well as what you can be doing now to better prepare so that when the time comes and you are being examined, you'll already be in a good place for the examination. I think actually, yeah, okay. Okay. In terms of the amount and the scope of information that's going to be requested, it's pretty much going to vary based on the type of examination that you're about to go through. So as Bill mentioned, there's basically four main types of SEC examinations. The most common these days really it is the presence exam, and that's sort of the more focused, risk-based risk-based examination. Typically, that initial document request for a presence exam is going to contain between 15 and 20 initial items. So those are going to be the documents that you'll start preparing. For sort of that more traditional, full-blown examination, which we're seeing less and less frequently, that initial document request can have as many as 40 to 50 items. So certainly, quite a bit to start preparing as you enter into the SEC examination. We've listed some common examples on the slide, some of the types of things that are typically going to be requested as part of any SEC examination, whether it be a presence exam or more routine examination. So definitely important to take a look at the list, ensure that these are the types of things that you would be able to provide upon an SEC exam. Common things like organization charts, information about the various fund vehicles that you advise. These are the sorts of things that you want to review now and ensure that you have good documentation in place so that when an SEC examination comes around, you already have that information to be able to provide to examiners.
Jillian, one thing to
Yeah.
note, I think most people in the office, and the audience rather, this is like a due diligence visit by an investor. So a lot of the stuff they're asking for is stuff that your RI team probably already has prepared, ready to go out the door. And I think it's probably from that perspective, it's a straightforward exercise in the very beginning. The things I think that are probably different, and you'll get to, is bait stamping, knowing what you gave them, keeping 2 copies of it. So you give them a copy and you keep an identical copy yourself, and that helps facilitate the process. What they do is they'll start on one set of documents and drill down. And as they start drilling down, it's good to have all the documents backed up so you can sort of follow along where they were going.
Yeah, I would say, as Michael raises a really great point, organization really is the key to going through an SEC examination, and a big piece of that is keeping great internal files, keeping everything in writing, what you're preparing, what you're providing to SEC examiners, when you're providing it. A lot of times, what they're requesting, especially in the supplemental document requests, they've already asked for sometimes. So you can actually refer back, on such and such date, we actually provided you this information, and sort of it helps the exam go a little bit more smoothly.
And Jillian, it's also important to note, they usually do this, but in case you forget, always ask for them to give it, whatever they ask you for, to get it in writing that they asked you for that information. That way you can sort of document what they asked for, why you gave it to them. If anything goes wrong down the path,
Yeah.
you can sort of follow it up from there.
That's a great point, because that will happen. They will ask you just passing in the hallway, can you send me blank? You should say, just send me an email so I can see the email. The other important thing I would note on the bait stamping is bait stamping is a function of there's what's called the FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act. And there's
Bill, can you step back? I don't think the audience knows what bait stamping is.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Bait stamping is basically a technical requirement of bait stamping to get confidential treatment for what you file in an audit. So in the U.S., there's a concept of what's called the Freedom of Information Act. It means when you file something with a governmental agency, in theory, somebody could go and request that information. They can get that record. That's why you see sometimes, like after many years, like the findings from the Kennedy assassination is now subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. It covers documents that you submit in the course of a regulatory exam. What you need to do is, when you do it, is you need to request what's called confidential treatment. And it's hyper technical. It requires you to bait stamp, and the bait stamp is you stamp every single page of what you submit and you watermark it. The problem around that, and just getting familiar with that process, is we utilize a software application that allows us to bait stamp quite efficiently. Even with that, there are times that the production is so amazingly large that it's going to take days, so it can affect the response time. And in an audit, you're going to want to know to some degree how long it's going to take you, because you don't want to create the impression you're not responding to a request by saying, hey, listen, I told you I was going to get that to you by tomorrow, but the bait stamping machine is going overtime. We're filling it up with gasoline, and it's going and going and going, but it's going to take us an extra 24 hours. So just something to think about.
Definitely. And I think that ties in nicely to the next slide in terms of actually what the document production process looks like. It's definitely a key component of the exam. It's sort of going back and forth with SEC examiners in terms of providing them with the information that they're asking for. And the key really is to be responsive. You really need to make sure that what you're providing is actually what's being asked. I wouldn't provide necessarily any more information than what is being asked, but you definitely want to make sure that you're giving the SEC what it is it needs to do its examination. If you don't understand something on one of the request lists, definitely call them, ask, if it's in advance of the examination. Make sure you really vet out that what you're providing and what you're preparing really is what they're looking for. You don't really want to spend time compiling a ton of documents, bait stamping them, putting them in the right format, only to find out that what you've prepared really isn't what they've asked for, just leads to a lot of inefficiencies and whatnot. So really making sure that you understand what the SEC is asking for. And speaking a little bit more about what we were talking about just a moment ago, it's really important to think about the logistics of document production. And so some of that ties into what we were talking about just now, but that FOIA information request, ensuring even before you provide the documentation, even before you provide the documentation that you've asked for that confidential treatment. That's a really important aspect, and that letter to the FOIA office should go out well before you ever provide any documentation to any SEC examiners.
Sorry. A lot of times they'll ask for documents and information in electronic format. So if they want a data dump from the portfolio, they'll ask for all the trades, all the trade information in a certain format. They'll ask for all the emails from these people for the last 3 years. How do you bait stamp that kind of stuff?
That sort of information, so Excel spreadsheets, emails, that actually can be bait stamped. And again, it's what Bill's referring to. There's special software that oftentimes needs to be utilized in conjunction with an examination. And so that's sort of the other piece of the formatting. Oftentimes, as part of the request letter, SEC examiners will ask that everything be provided in a specific format. The most common format, they call it concordant format. And effectively, when you put documents into this format, SEC examiners are more easily able to search through all of the hundreds of pages of information that you provided them. Getting information into that type of format often does require a software system. So again, it's one of those things you really need to plan ahead for. You may need the assistance of a law firm or a consulting firm that you're working with that has access to this software to be able to convert the documents into the proper format. The last piece on the slide really talking about sort of the timing and the notice that you're given in terms of providing documents to the SEC. Traditionally, in the past, the date of the on-site visit was effectively the deadline by which you had to have all of your documents prepared and ready to be examined. We're definitely seeing that the schedule for providing documents to SEC examiners has become quite a bit more truncated. So now pretty much examiners are calling up within a few days of sending out that request letter and asking, what do you have ready? What can I take a look at now? Unlike in the past where an examiner would show up to an on-site visit and basically not have even reviewed yet any of the information you've compiled, now they really want to already know sort of what they're walking into. So typically they'll be reviewing documents on a rolling basis and requesting that you provide documents as soon as they're ready so that they can basically look at just about everything they need to and make the actual on-site visit quite a bit more efficient and fortunately for you guys, quite a bit shorter.
And also just weigh in there, this is really a function of what the SEC stated intentions are, right? We've got the President's Exam Initiative followed very shortly thereafter by the Never Before Examined Initiative. They need to get a lot of work done in a very short period of time to hit their goals. They're actually obviously making requests for funding, and so what we are seeing is them using shorter time frames, a lot of remote work to get through the numbers they need to get through. Because if they took the old approach to the way routine exams would unfold, they would last 6 months, 8 months. They just never get through the stated numbers. And when they want to hit somewhere between 25 to 40% of a relatively large number, they have to change their approach to how they're doing the examinations.
Great. The next slide talks a bit more about the actual on-site visit. So during the on-site, certainly they're going to continue to review documents that you're providing to them. They're going to interview management. They're going to interview various members of the compliance team. And what we're also seeing is they're really reaching out to interview various members of the staff. And that's a really important point that, as chief compliance officers and members of the compliance profession, you really need to kind of drive that point home to all of the employees at the firm. Employees really can't view compliance as just being the sole responsibility of the chief compliance officer. Everybody at the firm has some component of compliance built into their job, and SEC examiners, when they come to audit, want to see that there is a culture of compliance at the firm and that everybody throughout the organization understands what their compliance obligations is, and potentially they could interview just about anybody at that firm.
I think on that note, it's worth trying to take charge of that process and telling the SEC, these are the people that we're going to put in front of you. Now, of course, they may ask to speak with others, but there is some aspect where the firms can take control and put in front of the SEC the people who you think will convey the best message. So that's important to keep in mind, not to just be reactive and wait for them to say, we'd like to speak with ABC, but to have certain people prepared and trained and lined up on day one.
Definitely. And you also see, as part of the Presence Exam initiative, oftentimes there's a specific, very narrow focus to the examination. So, for example, the entire Presence Exam may really revolve around marketing and advertising. So really ensuring, in that particular example, that the personnel that are involved with marketing are sort of ready to go for an SEC interview. And then, as Abrielle mentioned, really ensuring that your sort of best people are being, put in the forefront of the SEC examiner's eyes.
And Jillian, I think it's also important to note with the people that meet with the SEC, you need to convey to them, A, they need to answer honestly. If they don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know the answer. But also to only answer the question that was asked. Usually you find that some of your folks like to keep going about other stuff, and it makes the process harder to sort of keep it controlled and keep it on track.
Definitely. I think sometimes people think they're being helpful by sort of, going down a litany of things, and actually it's the reverse. They're sort of opening up the door to even more areas, or they say something then that an SEC examiner says, let me look into that area, and the next thing you know, what was a very small presence exam in a very small area can actually become a lot bigger than you had originally anticipated. In terms of preparing for the on-site visit, really, that's what it comes down to. Having a smooth on-site visit really comes down to preparation. You definitely want to be preparing your documents, as we were discussing. They should be responsive. They should be in the proper format. Your people, as we were discussing, really ensuring that, in particular, those individuals who are most likely to be interviewed by examiners have a good handle on what it is that's going to be asked of them and feel comfortable with that interview process.
And Jillian, on that point, set up mock interviews and really sit down and play the role of the SEC and see what your people say, because that's where you're going to get a gauge of people that you want to get in front of the SEC and people that you don't. And not because there's anything untoward going, it's just going to make it for a more complicated audit. Jillian's going to make this point, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but we talked about it as a panel a little bit earlier, is one area that could be helpful is where you be very proactive, and she's going to talk about creating a firm presentation, who we are, what we invest in, what are our risks, and maybe get your really key people involved in that presentation, frankly, because it allows for you to be proactive. You're sharing key people, but you're not putting them in an environment necessarily where they're necessarily just answering questions, and where they could answer questions either incorrectly or they could go down a particular path you didn't want them to go down. So it won't always work, but sometimes that could be a very helpful tool, because you get the key person there, you get them telling a story, you get them in front of the regulator, but it's a slightly different positioning and posturing as opposed to an interview.
And I think it's also worth mentioning that the key person for the program in the organization, typically the chief compliance officer, is present during all of these examinations. And so you're sitting there and you're listening and you're watching what's being said. And it's perfectly acceptable to chime in from time to time. If somebody does make a material misstatement, it's okay to correct them. The SEC understands that any one person does not know everything in the organization, and you are able to chime in, at select times and guide people as well to certain topics or guide them away from topics.
And I think one of the most important things that was Michael admit, I don't know is perfectly fine. And that's training people, because there's a lot of people who do not like to say, I don't know. They just know everything, and they think they know everything, and they will answer questions regardless of the fact of whether they know it or not. And you really have to ingrain in people, it's okay to say I don't know. It doesn't mean, there's lots of people that work at this firm, lots of people do different roles, and if they ask you a question you don't know about, you say, I'm not sure. I'm going to check with either the CCO or the CFO or the COO or somebody that I think is responsible for that area of the business.
And another key point with respect to the interviews and preparing individuals for interviews, that can be also a really great opportunity to actually identify deficiencies in your actual compliance manual. We'll get into this in a bit, but effectively, your compliance manual is the first document that SEC examiners are going to be asking for. And they definitely want to see that you are able to really evidence everything, every policy, every procedure, every best business practice that is contained in your manual is something you are actually doing in practice. So it's really important, as part of that sort of mock interview situation, you can actually identify areas where maybe an employee isn't actually following the compliance manual with a particular policy or procedure. So it's also another great tool to sort of prepare for an eventual SEC audit. The last thing just to talk about on this slide, really trying to identify issues and deficiencies, gaps in your files before the SEC comes in to audit. So as you're preparing that initial document request, you're getting the documents rolling out to examiners. If you identify something where you are missing a file or something is inaccurate, really working internally with other members of your firm, working with counsel, if you have compliance consultants, working with them to really see how you're going to respond to that inquiry from SEC examiners so you can basically spin it in the most positive light and really say to them, okay, this is an area we've identified as being deficient in at this particular time. This is how we're going to work to improve it. Just keep that dialogue open with the SEC examiners. Great. The next slide talks a bit about what goes on after that initial on-site visit. So typically, after the on-site, examiners are going to schedule what they call an exit interview. So during that interview, which typically takes place over the phone, the examiners will go through sort of their initial findings, areas where they think there might be a deficiency or areas where they think there's some potential concern for the firm. This is a really important time to, first of all, take very good notes, but also, really clarify any questions that they may have. They may have gotten something wrong. So this is a really great time to sort of correct any inaccuracies and sort of, plead your case a bit with respect to some of the areas that they're identifying.
And Jillian, I've also had experience in that exit interview process where they come up with something before it actually gets into the deficiency letter to go ahead and say, you told us about this 2 months ago or 2 weeks ago when you were here, we've already fixed it and this is the answer. So it kind of gets taken out of that deficiency letter before it even gets written.
Yeah, definitely. And also after the exit interview, typically our recommendation is to reach back out to the SEC with some sort of formal write-up as to how you are either have addressed issues that they've raised during the exit interview or in the process of addressing the issues that they've raised. And so even as part of that, if you've already corrected something that they've identified as part of the exit interview, for example, you've updated a policy or procedure or something to that nature, you can actually send that to them, with a formal letter. And oftentimes that will really affect the outcome of the final deficiency letter that is issued. They may soften their findings, they may shorten the findings if they feel that you've already gotten a handle on how to correct them, or best case scenario, they actually remove the finding entirely from the deficiency letter so it never actually makes the letter. So definitely having that dialogue during the exit interview and having some sort of formal response in between the time of the exit interview and when you would basically be receiving your deficiency letter can really influence the outcome of basically your overall exam.
And another point to think of in affecting that deficiency letter, it could also just create a much clearer trail because there are quite a few investors that as part of their due diligence will ask to see a copy of the letter. And if, let's say, the deficiency stays in the letter, I've seen letters where the content will say, you've told us on blankety blank you're doing X, Y, and Z in response to this noted deficiency. It makes it a much easier letter to go out and prepare to investors because then it becomes a one-step process instead of a multi-step process where then they come back to you and go, please represent to me what you're doing for blank A, B, and C. It's actually all contained in the one letter.
The last piece on the slide talking a bit about the deficiency letter, which a lot of times now they're actually referring to as sort of a findings letter. Majority of examinations are going to result in some sort of findings letter. Typically, you're going to receive a letter within 120 days of the conclusion of the exam, and you'll typically have about 30 days to respond to that letter. So when you receive the letter, the most important piece of advice really is to take it seriously, to review the issues with whoever it is internally at the firm that those issues affect. Basically formulate a plan, how you plan to go about correcting those issues and those deficiencies. And then the key really is to follow through. We're definitely seeing quite a few SEC enforcement actions, cases where firms have received a deficiency letter, similar to what Bill was talking about before. They said they were going to fix a particular item. They don't fix the item. The SEC comes back to examine. They see the same issues that were raised as part of the original deficiency letter. That can actually lead to enforcement action. So now we're taking it quite a bit further than just receiving a deficiency letter. So it's really important that as part of that review of the deficiency letter and putting in place that program and the way you're going to correct it, that you really follow through. And the last piece, really how you should prepare for an SEC exam. And I think we've talked, quite a bit about this already. But the key really in terms of actually responding to the document request list is really organization. Being sure that you're providing ideally a written response to every item that they're requesting, whether it be a formal document that they're sending over as part of a request letter, or as we mentioned before, if it's an oral request, that you get that request in writing from them, and that you follow up and respond to that particular item as well in writing. So even if it's something that's not applicable to your firm, getting that in writing, the explanation as to why a particular item that they're requesting is not applicable. In terms of what you can be doing now, as you can imagine, the days leading up to an SEC examination are very, very stressful, and there's certainly things that you can be doing now as a firm to really ensure that in the days leading up to an exam, you've already got a lot of things covered. The first, as we were talking a bit about before, is creating a first day presentation. This is pretty much becoming an industry standard, so it's really important to sort of think about how you want to present your firm's story. This is a great way, as Bill and others were mentioning, to really present the history of your firm, your investment strategy, your funds, as well as to really highlight the areas that you've made improvements in, enhancements you've made to your compliance program, the testing and the back testing that you do on a regular basis. These are the sorts of things where really on day one, as part of that initial on-site visit, you can really be showing the SEC examiners all of the things you've put in place to really promote a culture of compliance in the firm. The second piece, and we've talked a bit about this as well, really reviewing your compliance manual really critically. I mean, really reading every single line in the manual. If there is something that is in the compliance manual or in the code and you are not doing it and you really can't evidence to SEC examiners the manner in which you're carrying out that particular policy or procedure, you really should remove it. If it's something that's not required, if it's a best business practice and you're not really doing it, it really shouldn't be contained in the manual. Even a best business practice, when the SEC comes to audit, if they basically determine that you are not following it, in line with how it's written out in the manual, that in and of itself can become a deficiency as part of your deficiency letter. So that would be a shame to really receive a deficiency letter for items that aren't even required as a registered investment advisor. Another thing really to do now is ramp up your annual review process. So as Bill was talking about before, I mean, the annual review process is a really great way to show SEC examiners what you've done over the course of the year in terms of testing, reviewing conflicts of interest. I think the SEC they had an outreach program at the end of January, and one of the items that they really raised that they were actually concerned about is that a lot of registered investment advisors are just conducting sort of cursory annual reviews. They're not really kicking the tires on the program and ensuring that their policies and procedures are really in line with what they're doing and in line with regulatory updates. So it's really important to not just do a cursory review and to really delve in and document a robust annual review program. And the last thing, certainly to think about doing is to conduct, an audit prep exercise or some sort of mock audit exercise. We're talking a bit before about sort of, the interview process and potentially conducting mock interviews with employees. But similarly, it's important to look at what the SEC is requesting, prepare those documents in advance to the best of your abilities. That gives you a great way to identify gaps or issues that are going to be an issue upon audit, so you can correct them now. And certainly, with that comes employee training, really ensuring that employees understand their role and responsibilities under the compliance manual. And that will certainly also help in terms of, keeping things going with the annual review, as well as just the culture of compliance at the firm. So I think now Bill is actually going to walk us through the 2014 examination priorities that were released by the NEP earlier this month.
Great. Actually, before I do that, we've got quite a few questions that have come in, and I'll try to throw a few of them out there right now as it relates to the audit process. One question we got is, would it make sense to use a data room to provide documents and related materials for when the SEC do a visit? This way there is a full audit trail of all documents provided to the SEC. I think it's a good idea. We've had clients use data rooms. I think the data room would probably result in being more evidence of what you actually provided to them. I'm not sure if the SEC would go into the data room. They would still want the documents directly provided to them. But the idea of that is actually could be a great trail. I don't know if any members on the panel have any thoughts about that.
I've never heard the SEC be open and responsive to something like that.
Yeah.
It's more something we do in private equity, M&A world, where they probably want to have the disk or the copy. I mean, we've done FTP files and things like that, but that's probably the snazziest we've gotten.
Yep. Yeah, as you said, I think it could be a good tool just for audit trail if you want to use it, but I don't think the SEC would be open to going into it. Another question we have is the information provided electronically or hard copy paper? More often than these days, everything's electronic, and that's...
They typically request that the information be provided electronically. So usually it's going to be in Excel versions, PDFs. They don't really want any paper copies anymore.
Got another question here. Typically, what pre-registration information can be requested? We've definitely seen them do it. So they've gone back. I've seen them ask marketing documents, performance materials that are pre-registration. The question for the firm then is, how hard do you want to draw the line? Do you want to pick a fight and say, well, that's pre-registration, we're not going to prepare it, which could create the inference that you would think there was something wrong there. What we've worked with clients, and it's a case-by-case, fact-specific sort of thought process you go through is there anything there? Are we okay presenting it? And maybe we just provide it to them and just make it go away, but I don't know if anybody else on the panel has thoughts.
It's easier in the U.S. because you can argue that there wasn't a requirement to keep the records beforehand. So arguably, if you don't have them, you don't have them.
Yep.
Unfortunately, for the folks in the UK, they've already been regulated, so there's document retention requirements already, so they can't really use that argument.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's back to, is there anything we're really concerned about? And the more open and more friendly you're with the SEC, the more likely, once you give them stuff, they're more likely to say thank you and stop. When you say no, that's when they start digging more.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation we have quite regularly. Is like, let's look at what the materials are, how big of a deal is it, because you might get a lot more bang for your buck by just providing it and sort of moving on.
And it's also an opportunity to point out to the SEC how much your compliance program has improved and the controls have improved and how thoughtful you've been about it. So if you pull out something from 2008, which was not up to standard, and contrast it with today's standard, that could actually be quite helpful.
Great. Next question we have, and I'm sort of picking some of them out because we have quite a few, is the letter, and I'm assuming the deficiency letter, publicly available on the SEC website for each IA? No, that's not a publicly listed document. Then we got a question on the findings letter. Do we have to disclose this to all investors? There is no rule that says you have to disclose that to investors, but there's a lot of things you provide to investors that there's no rule that says you have to provide it to them. So I think it's going to be an issue that the firm will negotiate with those investors. We've seen a number of approaches. One is, here's the letter, or come into the office, you can sit with the letter, or here's a summary of what's in the letter. And they've all been successful to a different, one degree or another, but it's really a function of how hard investors, and I'd love to hear from the panel.
Investors always ask for it. They're usually going to have due diligence questionnaires, you're going to get quarterly attestations, you're going to get the audit rep letter. All these places are where they're going to ask about the SEC's letter, and they're going to come up. So I think once you've had the SEC exam, you might as well just go ahead and indoctrinate the entire IR staff that this is what happened, this is the findings, and this is what we did to correct the findings. It's just easier because everybody's going to know about it.
Next question we have are a couple of questions around the level of interaction with exempt reporting advisors. The stated position of the SEC is that they do not intend to examine exempt reporting advisors. So that is not going to be, they're not going to routine audit them, but I think they reserve the right if there were ever tips or complaints or issues about somebody that is an exempt reporting advisor. I wouldn't be surprised if they had some sort of interaction, but it will not be as a function of a never before examined initiative or a presence exam initiative or a routine exam. It's just, it is their stated intention not to examine exempt reporting advisors. Trying to go through all the questions here. This is interesting for the panel who are also FCA registered. It said SEC exam, it looks to be similar to what could be expected from an FCA visit. Do the panelists have specific differences in approach that they've noted?
I haven't gone through an FCA aero visit, but we have had the FCA come and visit our office for a short period of 3 to 4 hours. And I think the FCA approach to that process was very much about understanding what our business was first off, and then having a preset set of ideas of what they're expecting to hear back. So it was very much that if you talk to any other firm that went through the same process, it's always very similar. So I think if you talk about aero visits, you talk about to the compliance consultants about aero visits, there's a process and procedure, and it's always kind of the same thing. I think what you'll find with an SEC exam is that it's never the same flavor. It's always going to be very different when they come in, because they tend to be very open and excited about going down different tracks. So once they see something that's exciting to them or interesting to them, even if it's not what they're there for, they'll follow that. So I think that's probably one of the remarkable differences that I've seen between the SEC approach and the FCA approach.
And I think we haven't been visited by either, but we've done a good bit of work in both jurisdictions for preparation. And we're expecting the SEC visit to be much more formulistic. So what was mentioned before about a technical violation, something that really has no material consequence, but you've technically violated the custody rule. A certificate was on site 5 days instead of 2 days, something technical like that. The SEC will hone right in, where our understanding is the FCA may take a higher level, more principles-based approach to those types of issues. And as long as the spirit is being followed, it may not be as nitpicky, so to speak. The other thing that's worth noting on that is that the SEC is quite a regional organization, that the U.S. is quite, as everybody knows, it's large, and there's 13 regions, and each region is operated by the SEC quite differently. So the flavor of what an SEC examination is may vary considerably depending on where you are located. And my understanding is there's not that much variance in terms of when the FCA comes in, where you know what the approach will be. So I think there's a bit more uncertainty in terms of your SEC visits.
I would add just one thing. We also haven't been visited by the SEC yet, haven't had that pleasure, but I do understand that the SEC takes a very forensic approach, and if it's not documented, it didn't happen, which is a bit different from the FCA's.
Most definitely. I mean, the way I dumb it down probably for myself is you've got to be able to prove that you do everything you say you do in your compliance program. And they will not, and if you cannot prove it, you cannot point to something, whether it be written output from a technology application, records, they are going to come to the assumption that it was not done. So that's something very important to think about. One last question before we move on, because we could get tight on time, and I apologize if we don't get to all the questions. If we've got time at the end, we'll come back again. It says, one question I thought was interesting is where a firm leverages policy services from an affiliated but non-SEC registered firm, would that firm be exposed to the SEC exam? And I think we talked about this issue before we started the panel. The question there is, it's there has to be a high degree of certainty around the fact that that affiliated firm is not doing something that would require to be registered in the SEC. The simple fact that it is not registered will not insulate it. My guess is the SEC will push into it. I think this gets at points that Jillian made and Michael and other panelists made of preparing yourself for that eventual exam, and especially explaining your structure of this is what we are, this is what we do, this is what our registered entity does. We've got this affiliate, which is not registered, this is what it does, and it is not required for these reasons to be registered. That will make it a lot smoother, but we've definitely seen instances where that has not been as clear, and there has been some uncertainty where they've gone into the other entities. But I don't know if anybody on the panel wanted to weigh in on that.
Well, it certainly what keeps me awake at night. A lot of the hot topics that I know they're going to be focused on actually aren't relevant for our registered affiliate, our investment advisor in the U.S. It simply doesn't deal with custody. It never has pre-Dodd-Frank. This wasn't something that we tried to structure around. That's just the relationship it's had. Didn't involve custody, didn't involve execution. So when I'm certainly concerned, when we get the document requests, even at the very first point of contact, a lot of the answers will be not applicable, just absolutely not applicable. We don't do that. And I'm wondering how the examiners will react to that.
Yeah, and I think we were talking a bit about this before as well. I think as you're going through the SEC examination process, and certainly at the outset, when you first receive that initial document request, one thing certainly, as we were talking about before, reaching out to examiners if you have a question or you feel like something is not applicable, you can definitely have that dialogue with the examiners. In terms of the formal written request, if something is not applicable to you, either because you are offshore, the account is offshore, putting that in the letter, really explaining it to them. And I think, the SEC has now only really started to come into the UK, come into other areas where registered investment advisors are predominantly offshore, investors are predominantly offshore, the funds are offshore. So there are going to be certain things that are not necessarily captured by the Advisors Act for those particular investment vehicles. And I think it's a matter of, in some cases, educating the SEC a little bit as to what is and is not applicable and sort of how you do business and how you've actually applied the Advisors Act to your firm based on the way you're set up. And I think having that dialogue, that back and forth, is going to go a long way in terms of the examiner's eyes with respect to your deficiency letter. I mean, those things really shouldn't be captured if they're not applicable and you're not required to be following certain things.
Okay, great. Based on where we are from a timetable perspective, I'm going to move forward to sort of the last area and open it up to the panel. I'll just do a quick introduction. Each year, the National Exam Program, which I mentioned earlier, puts out and publishes its examination priorities for the coming year. The NEP did this on January 9th of 2014. It usually contains areas where there is a perceived risk or heightened risk, either based on information they're seeing from registrants, that may be things they're seeing in ADVs, seeing in Form PFs, seeing in other regulatory filings, information gathered through examinations when they're picking up that maybe similarly situated firms that potentially use similar strategies may have an issue that they want to now then bring up to the level of a priority, and obviously comments and tips, things that they were going to be hearing from former employees, investors, clients. As I mentioned, the examination priorities are listed for all 4 areas of the NEP. Again, we're really just focusing today on investment advisors, not broker-dealers, not mutual funds, and not transferring clearing agents and not self-regulatory organizations. But some of the NEP-wide initiatives that are interesting is, one is fraud detection and prevention. Obviously, that's always going to be on the list. Second is corporate governance and conflicts. And here they're really going to look at firms, and the stated intention is to see what the tone from the top is. Do you have a sensitive management team as it relates to compliance and control issues? Do they see that as a priority of the firm? And then a big one is going to be technology. I think in this day and age, everybody knows whether it be portfolio-related management technology, investor communication type technology, whether it be compliance-related technology. Technology really permeates all activities. And they're going to spend a lot of time to make sure, if you are leveraging technology, what kind of operational capability does it have? What kind of security do you have around it? And what is the plan that you would have if you're in a malfunction or an outage stage? And this is really something in this release that they really highlighted as being a core point.
Bill, do you think we'll receive further, more specific written guidance on what it is they'd like to see, some sort of minimum standards or best practices around the technology points?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think, once they go out and examine and focus in on the priorities, what you'll see, like, they've mentioned, an example is custody. As I mentioned, you'll see it's actually on the next screen. It is one of the core risks identified for registered investment advisors. It was a core focus of the President's Examined Initiative, and it is a core focus of the Never Before Examined Initiative. When they go out and they examine and they realize, I think we've talked about that there have been some issues with technical violations, they came out with a release, the Division of Investment Management say, this was a priority for us. We've examined a number of firms. These are the 5 things that we're seeing, and this is how we react to them. We don't want to see this. We don't want to see that. So it gives you a little bit more guidance, and I would assume we're going to see that in these areas too. That leaves us just a quick review of the core risks identified for advisors. One is safety of assets in custody, which we've sort of beat to death quite a bit today. Conflicts of interest, again, we've talked about quite a bit. And again, this gets into a comment that John made, is important, is what are you doing to demonstrate that you're on top of that? You can sort of say, I'm sensitive to conflicts of interest. I know it's important, but what am I actually doing? What can I show you to say, I ask these questions of employees on an annual basis or on a quarterly basis? I ask these questions of vendors and other business counterparties to demonstrate I'm sensitized to that. Marketing performance, as I mentioned, is always a big issue. One other issue that's not on the screen that I will throw out there before I sort of open it up to the panel is they are focusing on a growing trend in the U.S. of what are called alternative investment companies. We at Cordium actually have the good fortune to work with quite a few where you're seeing funds pursue alternative investment strategies inside of a traditional mutual fund structure. What you saw at the outset, overwhelmingly, they were fund-of-fund type products where they were basically asset allocators to other funds. But you are seeing that there are funds that will follow what I call more direct trading models inside this structure. There's a variety of reasons that they do it, most of which, frankly, are around the distribution end of things. They're a bit easier to distribute. They're also a bit easier for certain big firms to distribute in a more tax-efficient way in the United States. That being said, they are real compliance beasts, because unlike just when you have, let's say, a private fund that is sort of exempt from registration, all of the compliance issues really focus in on the advisor. Not only in these circumstances where you have the whole myriad of issues applicable to the advisor, but the funds themselves have to have their own compliance programs, their own CCO, they've got their own rules, they've got an independent board of directors. So it is a really sort of a bit of a beast. But being cognizant of the time, I wanted to just open it up to the panel and sort of get their view, generally speaking, of, you know, what do you think about the stated priorities? Are there areas that cause you concern? And I will preface it in the ways that I'm not saying you're terribly concerned about your firm and what you're doing to think about those issues, but I'll open it up to the whole panel.
So I wanted to make start off with one comment on the conflicts point that the SEC made. I think this is a great example of how you can leverage your work in the FCA environment. So the guidance that the SEC gave on how you demonstrate that you've addressed conflicts, I found quite vague. But picking up the Dear CEO letter that the FCA published about a year and a half ago, that gave actually very concrete guidance how a firm should manage conflicts. So if you were following the FCA's guidance there and you have a conflicts register and you're taking that upstream to management and you're having formal review and approval, that we believe will likely satisfy, if not go beyond what the SEC expects. So I think it's interesting for people in this room to think about how you can leverage the guidance given in both regimes to sort of help you out in the other.
And I think that's also following the Dear CEO letter in respect to technology and outsourcing technology from the FCA also ties in with the SEC's concerns as well. So I think from my perspective, the regulators are kind of in sync with things that are on a global basis very important. I think the area that the SEC is going to differentiate itself on is things that are nuances to its compliance program, and that's going to be the custody rule. That's going to be to some extent the marketing requirements and the specific prohibitions in marketing. Things like that are where I think the UK, US are going to be a little bit off kilter, and you just need to be sensitive to those. And I think we spend a lot of time with our staff going through the specific bits on the SEC side, be it getting quarterly account statements for the next number of days, be it no specific positive stock recommendations, be it make sure that the audit's out in 120 days. Things like that are very important for us to sort of highlight to the team.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, our actual affiliate, that's the registered investment advisor, doesn't engage in a number of the activities that are, I think, a lot of typically the SEC would expect to see an investment advisor engage in. And we are somewhat concerned with the structure. We did not try to structure around Frank Dodd. We have the structure we had, and it makes sense. We didn't want to change it. So we've tried to fit it into the regulations on both sides. But one thing that we have done is, because there's some concern about eventually the SEC wanting to reach through to effectively the client of our affiliate is the fund manager that's outside of the U.S. and is an exempt reporting advisor because it has no U.S. presence. It doesn't manage anything in the U.S. But if it does, we've basically brought our compliance up to standards that hopefully meet both regulators in almost every area, even though we feel like some of them shouldn't be relevant for the actual investment advisor, but we're ready for it in case that's the case. And I think most of the practices do make sense, and I think the FCA would be not displeased to see us meeting SEC level standards on most of these points.
And that's a key point. I mean, we're lucky enough at Cordium to work with clients and are really providing compliance support to them in the U.S. on SEC, CFTC, FINRA issues, in the U.K. on FCA, and even in Asia and Hong Kong related issues. And that's the key. And I think the running trend was through it is look at what you're doing in all the different jurisdictions and see how it can serve the needs of other jurisdictions. So if you're already doing something in a particular jurisdiction as it relates to disclosing, monitoring, tracking conflicts of interest, great. Let's turn around and use that as the tool. You don't need to reinvent the tool necessarily. With that, we've got about 10 minutes or so left. I figured I'd go back through some of these questions and see if we can actually come up with answers for them. And I'll go all the way back to the start. I think one of the early questions we got are, when are the SEC visiting the UK next? How much notice will they give an investment advisor? I don't know, but they don't really tell me. But they were here recently. My gut is, if I were a gambling man, which is a compliance person I probably should not be, I would bet it'll be a while, because they just came over, and the feedback we got with clients who were actually audited is that they greatly cut down the timetable, which we think was a budgetary issue. They wanted to shorten the trips and get them back and get them out of the hotels sooner rather than later. But that's my thought on that. I don't know if anybody on the panel has any different thoughts. Well, great. The next question we have is, after 8 insider dealing convictions relating to SEC, why would the SEC not revoke their license? Well, I think the way they've negotiated a settlement is that they're going to go to become a family office. So technically speaking, once they give back all their outside capital, they will no longer be required to be registered with the SEC, and it'll convert to a family office and become an exempt reporting advisor. So I think that is part and parcel of the settlement that they made. We got a long question here. Do you systematically monitor the implementation of the compliance manual on a monthly, quarterly basis? What tools or reports do you use? What could be demonstrated as hard evidence that employee follow the compliance manual apart from interviews? I mean, it's a big question, and it could have a very big answer, but I mean, it depends on the firm. I mean, we work with clients, obviously, to set up monitoring and reporting programs. There are not necessarily, although there are certain things in the United States that have to be done at certain intervals, whether it be a quarterly interval. I would say you should set up a program to make sure that it's being reviewed. Whatever's being filed by your employees is being reviewed. It's being documented. It's been clear that it's being done. We do a variety of that, and you could probably catch any one of the Cordium people offline, and they can go through that. The one thing I would say, in addition to sort of inquiries with employees, because one of the things that is very difficult to think of is, I always mention, is one of the biggest risk area I think every firm has, regardless of whether they're in the US, the UK, Asia. The biggest risk point is employees, right? That's somebody going off the reservation and creating a big problem for the firm and creating a lack of supervision issue. So part of what, unfortunately, a compliance program needs to mean is make it clear that if that does occur, that means somebody is off the reservation. The reservation is very clear. There are a very clear set of rules. In addition to requiring representations from employees and making periodic inquiries, I think one of the more important things people can do is train them. And train them and make it a regular function where they're training, it's documented, what they're so people can't come back and say, you did not necessarily tell me to do that.
And I think the other piece there as well is, when you are doing the back testing and reviewing files and personal trading and whatnot, when you do uncover violations, and you will uncover violations, I mean, no compliance program is perfect. The important piece is really to follow up on that violation. So if you have an employee who's not providing documentation in a timely manner with respect to personal trading, following up with them, documenting how you followed up with them. If it's providing additional training to that employee, documenting that. And if the violation continues, potentially, for example, in that case, not allowing that employee to personally trade anymore. The SEC understands that violations occur, but they want to see that you have a robust program such that when a violation occurs, you actually do something about it. And whether that's adding a new safeguard to your program or documenting a particular instance with an employee, they want to see that there actually was follow-up and action. So that's another really important piece of it.
Great. We got a couple of questions around, should UK firms get this Bates software? I mean, if you're an ERA, I would not say it would be a worthwhile investment, because the likelihood of you getting audited should be quite low, if not
Bill,
impossible.
I think also to add, it's only about $60.
Yeah, is it really?
It's really inexpensive. It's just basically a PDF application that sort of sits on top of what you already have.
But if you're an exempt reporting advisor, you don't. But I think if you are registered, it's something you should go at least look at and be familiar with. Next question. Has the SEC ever examined a UK-based IA with no business activity in the US? In theory, although I'd have to get in the fact pattern of that, that would likely result in being an exempt reporting advisor, more likely than not, depending on who they're advising. If they were advising, non-fund U.S. clients, then they would need to be registered, even though they technically have no business activity. But my guess would be that that would be an exempt reporting advisor which the likelihood of audit would be quite low. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that on the panel. What else? We have a question. In an examination, how far does the SEC look back in its review? The last 12 months, last 3 years, et cetera. It's sort of unique, depending. I mean, the President's exam were a little funky because they were going into firms that were very recently, so they were actually, it was quite common. They were going back at least a full year, and the first sort of wave of President's exams occurred. Actually, they were going prior to the time that they were registered. I'd say before that, I want to feel like it was like 2 years was sort of the period that would stick.
It really varies also based on what they're asking for. So, the majority of the request list might be for the prior 1 year period, but there might be certain items, for example, evidence of your annual review, that they may ask for the previous 3 or 4 annual review documents. So some things will actually look quite a bit back. Other types of information that can be very voluminous, information with respect to the trade blotter or things of that nature, they may actually shorten the period of time just because the amount of documentation that you're going to be providing them would be quite overwhelming.
I guess this would be a question for our duly registered panelists. Are there any key differences between an FCA and SEC compliance program? Would there be an assumption that an FCA-approved program would be sufficient? I don't know if anybody on the panel wants to weigh in on that.
I was going to comment earlier that Cordium did a great job on the compliance manual they provided us, and I think what they do is they outline, the specific categories. So whether it be conflicts of interest or be best execution, and then lay out the specific 2 different rule sets, and then sort of walk through that and sort of highlight it. And I think that you can't say if you have one, it covers the other entirely, because I think there are gaps. Best execution is going to be gaps. Code of ethics, personal dealing is going to be gaps. Those are probably the ones that come out. Custody is a gap. Marketing is a gap. And those are things that you just can't rely on one or the other, so it's helpful to have a manual that sort of ties it all together. So on the marketing side, these are the FCA rules, these are the SEC rules, and by the way, here's the CFTC rules too, just in case you need those, because they're all different, but they're all sort of in the same direction, but we try to take the approach to go to the highest mark there is and apply that across the organization.
Yeah, we took a similar approach with trying to find the highest denominator between the 2 jurisdictions. We found there were minimal, if any, areas that were in direct conflict. However, in certain areas, there was bespoke language that each regulator preferred to see. So there were certain areas where we needed to have the 2 sets of rules, but we took the view, and it's really a judgment call for the firm, we tried not to do that unless it was absolutely necessary and really choose the standard we felt was higher and operate consistently across both.
For what it's worth, I think that's a great approach, and that's the approach we follow with clients that are registered in more than one jurisdiction. We're getting close on time, but we got a couple of questions which I thought I'd try to put together around disaster recovery and business continuity planning, and one in particular about, with so many firms using systems like Bloomberg, how realistic is it for a small firm to spend time with what happens if Bloomberg systems were to fail? Yeah, I mean, one of the things to know, and this is specific to the U.S., I can't necessarily speak to the U.K., but the whole concept about disaster recovery, it's got to be unique to the firm and the size of the firm, level of assets under management, the client base of the firm, level of products used. So they're definitely not looking for a one-size-fit-all approach to say, regardless, you need, firm managing $125 million in asset under management has to have the same exact disaster recovery firm as a firm managing $22.5 billion. Examples of that, would be, do they have fully redundant offices that are rented 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? No. So it will always be, at least the U.S. will always look at it to make sure it's unique. I think the things that you need to think about is you really got to think it through and make it customized to your approach. And one of the big things I said, whatever your DR plan or business continuity plan is, our experience, especially if you're U.S. regulated, is they want to see you test it. And they want evidence. This goes back to the demonstrating you're doing what you say you're doing. They want to see evidence that it's been tested on a periodic basis. I don't know if anybody on the panel wanted to weigh in on that concept.
Yeah, we have historically tested the technological aspects quite rigorously and not tested the other softer aspects of the plan. And this year we decided to test them. We developed a phone tree and quite comically had a bit of Chinese whispers, as they say, down the testing out of the phone tree. And people, obviously, that did not perceive that as a value-added exercise, but needed to be told, we need to do this and we need to document it because that's what the regulators expect.
We also use the instances where the cables get cut and the power goes out as sort of DR tests, because it happens not infrequently here. We've gone to the DR site, had people work from the DR site for the full day. Kind of messes up the daily routine, but I think it's something that's very helpful for the regulators. But also, not for nothing, the investors are asking us the same questions. They're very concerned about it as well. So I think you kind of tick a couple boxes by doing it.
Well, fantastic. We weren't able to get through all the questions, but we're at the end of this session, so I want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate. I want to thank the panelists who were great. We had a great free-flowing conversation, and to the extent we didn't answer a question that was posed, feel free to reach out to one of the various Cordium team members that are around for the day and pose that question. But thank you all very much.